Commander Zek Norovo of the Galactic Triumvirate massaged his three eye stalks and stared at the holographic display. Another report of human expansion into the Orion Arm. Another potential conflict brewing. Another headache. Why can't they just stay in their little corner of the galaxy? He grumbled to his aide, Lieutenant Pax. They have been spacefaring for what, 80 years? And already they are pushing boundaries like toddlers testing their parents. Pax's skin rippled with amusement, the equivalent of a chuckle. They breed like Krillian swarm rats, sir. Their population pressure alone was not what I asked for, Lieutenant, Zek snapped. I know the statistics. What I don't understand is the psychology. The curved door to his office hissed open, and Admiral Telek swept in, her ceremonial cape billowing behind her. The scales along her neck were flushed bright orange, never a good sign. The Council has reached a decision, she announced without preamble. We are initiating formal peace talks with the humans. Zek's middle eye stalk drooped in disbelief. Peace talks? We aren't even at war with them yet. Representative diplomacy, Telex replied, her tone dry as the deserts of Nix Prime. Apparently someone important noticed that every species that's tried to intimidate humans has regretted it. Spectacularly. The Korthos incident, Pax murmured. Telex hissed in agreement. 3 warships. 3. Against 1 human mining vessel. And somehow the Korthos battle group ended up as debris. The Council is concerned. So instead of showing strength, we are inviting them to tea. Zek couldn't keep the disdain from his voice. Marvelous strategy. You misunderstand, Commander. Admiral Telex's eyes narrowed to slits. You will be hosting these talks. On neutral ground, with full diplomatic powers to negotiate terms that keep them contained without triggering their bizarre propensity for turning defeat into victory. Zek felt his heart sink to somewhere near his lower intestines. Me? But I'm not a diplomat. I'm a military strategist. Precisely. Telex's mandibles clicked in what passed for a smile among her kind. We need someone who understands the threat they pose. Someone who won't be charmed by their, what did the cultural report call it? Oh yes, their endearing tenacity. Endearing like a plasma burn, Zek muttered. You leave in 6 cycles, the Admiral continued as if he hadn't spoken. The delegation from Earth will meet you at Outpost Kappa. It's uninhabited except for service droids, atmospherically compatible for both species and, she paused meaningfully, equipped with defensive measures should negotiations become heated. After Telex departed, Zek turned to Pax. Pull everything we have on human diplomatic protocols. And I mean everything. If they consider belching a sign of respect, I want to know about it. Already compiling, sir, Pax replied, their digits flying over the control panel. Though I should warn you, their diplomatic corps was as notoriously unpredictable. Wonderful, Zek sighed. Just what we need. 6 cycles later, Zek stood in Outpost Kappa's cavernous meeting chamber, tugging at his formal uniform collar. The room was designed to impress, soaring ceilings, ornate pillars carved from rare blue asteroid mineral, and a massive circular table that had hosted peace treaties ending 3 interstellar conflicts. Status report? He barked into his communicator. Human vessel has docked, Commander, came the response. Their delegation is smaller than expected. Just 3 representatives. Zek frowned. 3? The protocol suggested at least 12 for a negotiation of this magnitude. Perhaps they don't consider it as significant as we do, suggested Pax, who stood at attention nearby. Or they are so arrogant they think 3 is sufficient, Zek replied. Either way, it's insulting. The massive doors at the far end of the chamber slid open with a theatrical rumble. Zek straightened his posture, preparing to project authority and gravitas. The triumvirate delegation, himself, Pax, and 10 senior officials, formed a perfectly symmetrical receiving line. 3 humans entered. Zek had studied human physiognomy, of course, but seeing them in person was different. They walked with a strange rolling gait on their 2 legs, seeming perpetually off balance yet never quite falling. Their faces were flat, with ridiculous little sensory organs protruding in all the wrong places. And they were colorful, each dressed in different hues rather than the uniform formality the occasion demanded. The one in the lead was small for their species, with a head covering of red fibers that human records identified as hair. Behind her walked a taller specimen with dark skin and no visible hair, and finally, a pale one with yellow hair and an expression that reminded Zek uncomfortably of a predator assessing prey. "Commander Zek Norovo," the red-haired one said in surprisingly good galactic standard. "I'm Ambassador Tara Wilson of Earth. My colleagues are Dr. Jordan Bell, xenobiologist, and Major Annika Porter, military attack." Zek performed the formal greeting gesture of the triumvirate, 3 tentacles extended, palms upward. "The Galactic Triumvirate welcomes you to Outpost Kappa," he recited. "May our discussions bring harmony to the void between our worlds." The human called Wilson smiled, displaying rows of small white bones that humans used for crushing food. Zek suppressed a shudder. "Let's hope so," she said, ignoring the formal response her cultural briefing surely contained. "Though I have to say, we were surprised to receive your invitation. We weren't aware there was any diplomatic situation requiring, what was your phrase? Urgent resolution? Already deviating from protocol. Typical. Your species' expansion into the Orion Arm has created concerns among triumvirate worlds," Zeke stated flatly. "We seek to establish boundaries that will prevent future conflicts." The one called Porter, the predator-eyed one, made a sound that human records identified as a snort. "Boundaries," she said. "The nearest triumvirate colony is 17 light-years from our farthest outpost. The rate of your expansion suggests that gap will close rapidly," Pax interjected. Wilson held up a small pink hand. "Perhaps we should all sit down before we get into the details. We have traveled quite far, and these discussions clearly require careful consideration." Zek gestured toward the grand table. "Of course." As they took their seats, the humans clustering together on one side, rather than distributing themselves as protocol dictated, Zek noticed something odd. The humans had brought no visible recording devices, no data pads, not even the primitive paper. Their briefings mentioned they sometimes still used. "You have come unprepared?" he asked, unable to contain his surprise. Dr. Bell smiled. "Oh, we have prepared. Just not in the way you might expect." Something about the way he said it sent a chill down Zek's central nerve column. The formal proceedings began with a recitation of the triumvirate's concerns, human population growth rates, resource consumption patterns, military capabilities that seemed disproportionate to their technological level, and most importantly, their alarming tendency to win conflicts they should, yet by all logical analysis lose. Throughout the presentation, Ambassador Wilson listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Her colleagues remained silent, though Porter's eyes never stopped moving, clearly assessing the room's defensive capabilities. When the triumvirate presentation concluded, Wilson folded her hands neatly on the table. "If I understand correctly," she said, "you are concerned that humans might eventually pose a threat to triumvirate interests. Despite the fact that we have had exactly 0 conflicts with your people, we have never encroached on your territory and have, in fact, established trade relationships with 3 of your protectorate worlds." Preemptive measures began one of the triumvirate officials. "Are generally taken against known threats," Wilson interrupted. "Not against potential allies who happen to be good at surviving." Zek leaned forward. "The Korthos incident was a response to pirates attempting to seize a civilian mining vessel," Porter cut in, her voice sharp. "The Korthos fired first. We have the recordings." "Which we have shared with your intelligence services," added Bell. "Though I notice they don't appear in your presentation." Zek felt his skin flush with heat. That information had indeed been absent from his briefing materials. Someone had edited the reports. But why? Regardless, he pressed on. "The Triumvirate Council proposes a treaty establishing clear zones of influence. Human expansion would be limited to these designated sectors. He gestured, and a holographic map appeared above the table, showing a tiny bubble of space labeled human territory. Surrounded by the vast expanse of triumvirate-controlled systems, there was a moment of silence. Then Ambassador Wilson laughed. Not a polite diplomatic chuckle, but a full, genuine laugh that echoed off the ornate ceiling. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her eyes, "but you can't possibly be serious." "I assure you, Ambassador, the Triumvirate Council is quite serious." Wilson shook her head. "You are asking us to sign away our future, to voluntarily confine ourselves to a tiny fraction of available space, surrounded by your territory on all sides. That's not a peace treaty. That's a reservation. It's generous considering your species' limited history in space," another Triumvirate official said stiffly. "Is it?" Dr. Bell asked softly. "Or is it that you have noticed something about us that frightens you?" The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. "We are not frightened," Zek declared. "We are cautious. Your species has demonstrated unusual capabilities." "Such as?" Porter asked, speaking directly for the first time. "Your adaptability is concerning," Pax said. "You thrive in environments that should be hostile. You develop solutions to problems that seem insurmountable. You win conflicts against superior forces through unpredictable means." "So we are being penalized for being good at survival?" Wilson raised an eyebrow. "That's an interesting diplomatic position." Zek felt the conversation slipping away from him. This wasn't proceeding according to the prepared scenarios. "The terms are non-negotiable," he stated, falling back on his instructions. "The Triumvirate Council has authorized me to offer economic incentives in exchange for your compliance, but the territorial boundaries are fixed." Wilson exchanged glances with her colleagues. Something unspoken passed between them. "I think," she said carefully, "that there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of these talks." "How so?" Zek asked, suddenly wary. "You have presented this as a negotiation between equals, yet your terms suggest otherwise." Wilson's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel beneath it now. "More importantly, you seem to have made assumptions about human behavior and motivations that are inaccurate. Our xenopsychologists have studied your species extensively," Pax objected. "Have they?" Bell smiled. "Or have they studied our responses to threats? Because there's a crucial difference." Porter leaned forward. "Let me be blunt, Commander. Your proposal reads like the opening move in a containment strategy. The kind that typically precedes military action if the contained party doesn't comply." Zek felt his heart accelerate. How had they deduced that? The contingency plans for enforcement were classified at the highest level. "That is not," he began. "It is," Wilson interrupted. "And we have seen this pattern before with the Korthos, with the Imrezik Consortium. The difference is, we are giving you an opportunity to reconsider before things escalate." "Is that a threat, Ambassador?" Zek asked coldly. Wilson smiled. "Not at all. It's an invitation to actual diplomacy, rather than whatever this is." She gestured at the holographic map still hovering above them. "The terms reflect the Council's decision," Zek insisted. "If you reject them." "When?" Porter corrected. "When we reject them." Zek's patience snapped. "Then you leave us no choice but to enforce the security of our borders through other means." The three humans exchanged another glance. Then, to Zek's surprise, Ambassador Wilson stood up. The peace talks ended when she stood up. Not dramatically, not storming out in anger, but calmly, with purpose. She straightened her colorful garment and looked directly at Zek. "Commander Norovo," she said, her voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. "I believe we need to restart this conversation with more accurate information. Specifically, information about why the Triumvirate is suddenly so interested in containing humanity." "I have explained our concerns," Zek replied stiffly. "No," Wilson said. "You have presented a narrative. But Dr. Bell has been analyzing your presentation, and certain details don't align with our own intelligence. For instance, the population growth projections you have cited are nearly double our actual rates. Bell nodded. And the military capabilities you have attributed to us include technologies we don't possess. Yet. Which suggests, Porter added, her predator eyes fixed on Zek, that someone has been feeding your council deliberately inflated threat assessments. The question is, who benefits from pushing our civilizations toward conflict? Zek felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath him. Could she be right? The data discrepancies were troubling, especially coming from the highest levels. What are you suggesting? He asked cautiously. Wilson's expression softened slightly. I'm suggesting that neither of us may have the complete picture. And before we commit to paths that lead to unnecessary conflict, we should compare notes. She gestured to her colleagues, who also rose to their feet. We will return to our vessel for the night cycle, Wilson continued. Tomorrow we'd like to present our own assessment of the situation, including some intelligence about third parties who might be interested in seeing the triumvirate and humanity at odds. Third parties? Pax echoed, confusion evident in their voice. The galaxy is full of players, Lieutenant, Porter said grimly. Not all of them show their cards. As the humans turned to leave, Wilson paused and looked back at Zek. One more thing, Commander. You mentioned our tendency to win conflicts we should lose. Have you considered that might be because we only fight when we must? When the alternative is extinction, humans become resourceful. With that parting thought, the human delegation departed, leaving Zek staring at the space they had occupied, his mind racing with possibilities he had never considered. Sir? Pax's voice broke through his thoughts. Should I report this to Admiral Telix? Zek considered for a long moment. No, he said finally. Not yet. First, I want to verify some of our intelligence independently. Something isn't adding up, and I intend to find out what. As he gazed at the holographic map still floating above the table, the tiny bubble labeled human territory surrounded by the vast triumvirate space, Zek couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something vital, something that might change everything he thought he knew about the peculiar bipeds from Earth. And for the first time since receiving this assignment, Commander Zek Norovo felt something unexpected, curiosity. On cycle on Outpost Kappa brought no clarity to Commander Zek Norovo. He'd spent the night analyzing data, comparing intelligence reports, and finding disturbing inconsistencies. The humans' accusations had merit. Someone had altered the threat assessments, subtly enough to pass cursory inspection, but the pattern was unmistakable once he knew to look. Anything from Admiral Telix? He asked Pax, who had remained by his side through the sleepless hours. Nothing, sir. But there's unusual communication traffic between her vessel and the Vortex sector. Zek's eye stalk stiffened. Vortex? There's nothing in Vortex except, oh! The Sevon corporate holdings, Pax confirmed. Specifically, their primary mining operations. Pieces began clicking into place in Zek's mind. The Sevon conglomerate, the largest resource extraction corporation in triumvirate space, had been lobbying for expanded mining rights for cycles. Rights the Council had denied due to environmental concerns. Rights that would be instantly granted if there was a military necessity. Pull up the star charts for the proposed human containment zone, Zek ordered. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the tiny bubble allocated for human expansion. Now overlay known resource deposits. As the new data appeared, Pax gasped. The space surrounding the human containment zone glowed with indicators of rare minerals, heavy elements, and energy sources. They are not containing humans to prevent conflict, Zek murmured. They are boxing them out of resource-rich regions for the benefit of the Sevon, Pax added. But why manipulate intelligence reports? Why not simply declare those sectors off limits for legitimate economic reasons? Zek's third eye narrowed, because the Council would never approve such naked profiteering at the risk of interspecies war. But if humans could be painted as an existential threat. A chime sounded, indicating the human delegation had returned to the outpost. "What now, sir?" Pax asked. Zek straightened his uniform. "Now we hear what the humans have to say. And then I make the hardest decision of my career." When the humans entered the chamber, Zek noted immediately that something had changed. Ambassador Wilson carried herself differently, more tension in her small frame, her eyes sharper, more focused. Major Porter walked with one hand resting near a device on her hip that Zek strongly suspected was a weapon, despite the strict no-arms policy of the outpost. Dr. Bell carried an actual physical case, something he hadn't brought yesterday. Commander Wilson nodded curtly. "I trust you have had a productive night." "Illuminating," Zek replied. "I believe you mentioned having intelligence to share." Wilson gestured to Bell, who placed the case on the table and opened it. Inside sat a simple data cube of unfamiliar design. This contains intercepted communications between Admiral Telix and representatives of the Sevon conglomerate, Wilson stated without preamble, dating back approximately 1 standard year and outlining a plan to manipulate triumvirate intelligence regarding human expansion. The chamber fell silent. The triumvirate officials exchanged nervous glances. "That's a serious accusation," Zek said carefully. "How did you obtain these communications?" Porter smiled thinly. "Let's just say humans have certain capabilities that the triumvirate intelligence services may have underestimated. The point," Wilson continued, "is that we are not here to negotiate a containment treaty. We are here to address a conspiracy that threatens both our peoples." Zek felt the weight of 11 pairs of triumvirate eyes upon him. His next words would determine much. "Before we proceed," he said slowly, "I should inform you that I have conducted my own investigation overnight. The data you are presenting appears to align with my findings." A ripple of shock went through the triumvirate delegation. One official rose to his feet. "Commander, this is treasonous. You cannot possibly believe these primitives over Admiral Telix." "Sit down, Counselor Vrek," Zek snapped. "I believe evidence, not narratives. And the evidence suggests we have been manipulated." Wilson's expression softened slightly. "Then perhaps we can have a real conversation now." Bell activated the data cube, and a holographic display sprang to life above the table. It showed Admiral Telix in her private chambers, speaking with a Sevon executive. The audio was crystal clear. "Once the humans are contained, the Council will have no choice but to grant emergency resource extraction permits. The military will require unprecedented material support to maintain the containment barrier." "And my commission?" the Sevon asked. 20% of all new operations, as agreed," Telix replied, "plus positions for your offspring in the academy." Bell paused the playback. "There are 17 more conversations like this, aggressively detailing how intelligence would be falsified, how the Council would be pressured, and how military resources would be allocated." Counselor Vrek had gone pale. "This cannot be authentic." "I assure you it is," Porter said. "Your own verification protocols will confirm it." Zek felt sick. He'd served the triumvirate with honor for his entire career, believing in its principles of order and collective security. To discover such corruption at the highest levels. "Why bring this to me?" he asked Wilson. "You could have taken this directly to the Council." "We tried," she replied grimly. 3 months ago, our diplomatic corps sent a detailed report through official channels. It vanished into the bureaucracy, and suddenly we were facing increased triumvirate military patrols near our borders. "So you accepted this meeting as a way to bypass Telix," Zek realized. Wilson nodded. "We gambled that the officer chosen to lead the talks might be someone of integrity, someone who would listen." Pax leaned forward. "But surely your government doesn't expect the triumvirate to simply ignore human expansion forever? Even without Telix's corruption, your species' growth rate is concerning." "Which brings us to our proposal," Wilson said. "The real reason we came." She nodded to Bell, who switched the holographic display to a different image, a complex star chart highlighting different regions in various colors. We call this the Orion Cooperative Initiative, Wilson explained. Rather than containment, we propose managed co-development of the Orion Arm with demilitarized buffer zones, joint scientific missions, and a resource-sharing compact. Porter stepped forward. Human ships have already charted most of these regions. We have identified resource deposits that could support both our civilizations for centuries without conflict, if we cooperate rather than compete. And we gain what, exactly? Asked another triumvirate official skeptically. Our technology, Bell said simply. Specifically, our adaptive engineering techniques. We have reviewed the triumvirate's colonial failure rate. 78% of your terraform attempts fail within the first decade. Our success rate is 93%. Zek couldn't contain his surprise. How? Your species has barely begun interstellar colonization. Wilson smiled. Because we don't try to force environments to conform to rigid parameters. We adapt, both our technology and ourselves. It's what humans do best. Show them, Porter suggested. Bell touched the data cube again. The display shifted to show a barren, hostile-looking world. This is Nueva Terra, our third colony world, he explained. Atmospheric composition was toxic, temperature fluctuations extreme, soil chemistry incompatible with Earth life. The image shifted to show the same planet, but transformed, blue oceans, green land masses, sprawling cities. This is Nueva Terra now, 15 years later. Murmurs spread through the triumvirate delegation. Impossible, someone whispered. The atmospheric conversion alone would take a century with our methods. Which is precisely why we are offering to share our techniques, Wilson said. In exchange for fair access to the Orion Arm and a mutual defense pact. Defense against whom? Zek asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. The Sevan aren't acting alone, Porter said darkly. They are proxies for someone else, someone who's been systematically attempting to engineer conflicts between emerging and established spacefaring civilizations. Bell changed the display again, showing a strange vessel of unfamiliar design. We encountered this ship near the Arcturus Gateway last year. It claimed to be a triumvirate science vessel. When we attempted standard communications protocols, it opened fire, then self-destructed when we disabled its engines. That's not one of ours, Pax said immediately. The configuration is all wrong. We know, Wilson nodded. We have identified similar false flag operations against 4 other species in the past 3 years. Always disguised as ships belonging to potential rivals, always attempting to provoke conflict. Zek felt cold dread settling in his stomachs. You believe someone is deliberately destabilizing this sector of the galaxy. We don't just believe it, Porter said grimly. We can prove it. The Sevan Communications reference their benefactors, entities that provide them with technology beyond triumvirate capability in exchange for their cooperation in the... How did they phrase it? Ensuring optimal conditions for the great harvest, Bell quoted. A heavy silence fell over the chamber. The triumvirate has legends, one of the older officials said slowly. Ancient warnings about entities that seeded young civilizations, encouraged them to flourish and expand, and then harvested them when they reached their peak. Like crops. Wilson nodded. Earth has similar myths. We dismissed them as superstition until we began finding evidence of advanced civilizations that simply vanished. No signs of war or natural disaster. Just empty cities and abandoned ships. So rather than containing humanity, Zek said, thinking aloud, we should be uniting against this common threat. That's our proposal, Wilson confirmed. In a mutual defense pact first, followed by a comprehensive alliance once the immediate Sevan conspiracy is addressed. Counselor Vrek shook his head violently. This is absurd. Commander, you cannot possibly believe this fantastic tale. It's obviously a human ploy to gain access to our territory. Is it? Zek asked quietly. Or is it more likely that Admiral Telix has been compromised? That she's either knowingly or unknowingly serving these harvesters? The room erupted in argument, triumvirate officials shouting over each other. Zek noticed that the humans simply waited, watching the chaos with remarkable patience. Finally, he'd had enough. Zek slammed his appendage on the table with enough force to crack the ancient stone. Silence. The chamber fell quiet instantly. "We face two possibilities," Zek said, his voice level. "Either the humans are lying, and this is an elaborate deception to gain advantage over the triumvirate, or they are telling the truth. And we face an existential threat that has already compromised our highest military command." He turned to Wilson. "You came here expecting to be dismissed, possibly even detained. Yet you brought this evidence anyway. Why take such a risk?" Wilson's eyes met his without wavering. "Because if our positions were reversed, we would want the same chance, the same warning." Something in her simple answer resonated with Zek. It spoke of a fundamental decency that transcended species differences, a willingness to risk everything on the slim chance of being heard. "What would you have me do?" he asked her. "Help us present this evidence directly to your full council," she replied. "Bypass Telex entirely. We need allies who understand the true nature of the threat." Zek considered for a long moment, aware that his next decision would likely end his career one way or another. "Lieutenant Pax," he said finally, "secure this chamber. No communications in or out." "Sir?" Pax looked uncertain. "We are going to draft a new treaty, one that addresses the actual situation rather than the fiction we have been fed. And then we are going to present it to the council together with the evidence of Telex's treachery." Rex shot to his feet again. "This is mutiny." "No, Counselor," Zek replied calmly. "This is duty. To the triumvirate, not to corrupt individuals within it." He turned back to Wilson. "I will need everything you have on these harvesters. Their capabilities, their patterns, any weaknesses you have identified." For the first time since entering the chamber, Ambassador Wilson smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her alien features from strange to somehow familiar. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said. "Major Porter, the full briefing package, please." Porter produced a much larger data storage device from her uniform. "This contains everything we know, including the locations of two other species facing similar infiltration attempts. Potential allies." For the next 12 hours, the unlikely coalition worked tirelessly, drafting a comprehensive alliance treaty, compiling evidence, and planning their approach to the full council. The more Zek learned about humanity, the more his preconceptions fell away. Their adaptability wasn't just biological, it extended to their thinking, their social structures, their very approach to existence. "You know," he said to Wilson during a brief rest period, "the reports about your species' unusual capabilities weren't entirely wrong. You do seem to thrive in situations that would destroy most civilizations." Wilson shrugged. "We have had practice. Our homeworld tried to kill us for most of our evolution. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, you name it, we survived it. So when we encountered threats in space, we just adapted. Like always." "The peace talks ended when you stood up," Zek mused, "but something much more important began." "Peace talks were never what this was about," Wilson replied. "This was about recognizing what we could be together, rather than fearing what we might do to each other." As the final document was prepared, Zek felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the grim determination to maintain the status quo that had defined his career, but genuine hope for a better future. "The council won't make this easy," he warned Wilson. "Even with this evidence, there will be resistance." Porter grinned, that predator smile suddenly seeming more companionable than threatening. "We are counting on it. Humans excel at impossible situations." "Besides," Bell added, "we have already sent copies of everything to our government. If something happens to us, Earth will know why." Zek nodded appreciatively. Prudent. As they prepared to board his command shuttle for the journey to the triumvirate capital, Wilson paused beside him. "You are taking an enormous risk, Commander." "Why?" Zek considered the question carefully. "Because sometimes duty requires more than following orders. Sometimes it requires recognizing when the path you have been set upon leads to destruction. A very human perspective, she observed. Perhaps, Zek replied, his three eyes blinking in sequence. Your species doesn't have a monopoly on adaptation after all. As the shuttle's engines ignited, carrying this improbable alliance toward an uncertain reception, Zek found himself oddly at peace. Whatever came next, whether vindication or disgrace, he knew he was finally serving the true purpose of the triumvirate: protection through unity, strength through cooperation. And as he watched Ambassador Wilson studying the stars through the viewport, her expression both determined and hopeful, Commander Zek Norolvo realized that the galaxy might just be big enough for all of them if they faced its darkest threats together.